So I love that you're here, especially in this setting. Okay, I can't think of a better place in the whole of Dundee to have this discussion, because this environment, the whole vision for this business is about integrating children and families at the heart of our community, and it screams it. So I have tweeted tonight pictures of baby carriages and heroes' uniforms and Star Wars characters, and butterflies. Why don't we have more settings like this? Where did they go? Because there's an awful lot of cafes in the city, but in a number of those cafes, mothers and fathers are afraid to take their children. And so often when I pop in for a coffee, I will come here because I can just sit and watch the children and watch parents be at ease. Okay, how do we have more settings like that? How do we make that be part of the early years policy for our country as well as identifying standards for childcare, and as well as thinking about how does that childcare translate into primary one? How do we have this be part of our early years agenda? So let's start with the fact that this is a more female-dominated audience, because actually this audience for me has more men in it than I usually speak. Can all the men in the room please put up your hands? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. In a crowd of, I don't know, we're not quite at 50, but 8. Okay, can I point out that of those 8, 2 of them are the book editors, 1's the cafe owner, and 2 of them work on my team. So of those 8, 5 don't count. So in this audience, we have 3 men who came along to talk about early years. I think that speaks to something about what is going on in early years in our country. And my normal ratio is 100 women to every 1 man. Okay? So if that's one thing interesting to observe about the audience, can we just find out, why did more of you come? Because this is a really wonderful, unusual opportunity for me. Normally, I explain the science of attachment and the science of biology and think about what that means in practice and try to help people to think that through. But it's much more rare that I get to talk explicitly about the politics. And politics make a lot of people nervous. But it's politics, of course, that govern a whole lot about what we are able to do, what's easy to do or hard to do in a society. And at the moment, politics is major. The politics of early years is major in our country. So I was at the S&P conference, when was that? A few weeks ago. And I was there because I was part of a fringe event with Children First to talk about trauma. And I picked this up. So the key word there was progress. It was on all the banners and so this is the summary of what went on at the S&P conference. And there's a whole lots of lists here. So we've got free tuition fees, £750 million more for schools, prescription charges abolished, 200,000 modern apprenticeships, extra bobbies on the beat. So these are things the S&P feel like they have achieved. But the very first one, right there in the corner, is baby boxes. Okay, and I think they chose baby box. This is well designed. They put that there for a reason. They put it there to think early years as at the heart of a lot of what the S&P wants to see themselves as doing. I know this is, okay. In fact, Nicola Sturgeon said in 2014 that the early years policy was the infrastructure on which they were going to found S&P policies. And then there were a lot of analogies made about the new bridge. It's been, so is that taking 3 years to build? Okay, childcare was going to be the bridge for Scotland. So early years policy is crucially important to us in Scotland at the moment. But I rarely get to talk about the politics. Okay, so why did you come tonight? If you're largely an early years audience, why did you come? This is where everybody thinks, let me crawl under the chair. I don't want to talk. So it takes courage to think about this and to say out loud. It takes courage. But it's interesting to ask, why did you come tonight? So, how many came for the politics tonight? Look around the room. Okay, so, but some of you explicitly came because of the politics. Yay. Okay, a whole lot of you didn't just raise your hands. So why did you come? So I hope for discussion about what happens when we have 1140 hours, which is the childcare policy. So for anybody who doesn't know that, by 2020, we will have funding for all 3 and 4-year-olds to be in childcare for 30 hours a week, as well as vulnerable 2-year-olds. So that is the S&P's early years policy, and that's what they're putting money into. Okay, so one of the debates there is, are they putting enough money into it? Because, okay, who just said that? What lovely, see that, everyone turn and look at that rabble-rousing little thing. She just said no. What do you mean?
I am a trade union official and I work with the Unison, and I have been round lots of early years practitioners talking to them about the impact that already the increase in pre-nursery hours is having, and the impact that's having on their ability to deliver education. The fact that there's a contrast between giving care and education within that setting. There's too many factors that the SNP haven't thought through on this, and it's filtering down into local governments and into early childcare provisions without it being properly implemented, and it's having a massive impact on my members.
Can everyone feel and hear the strength of that argument? Yeah? Tell us your name.
Kirsty.
Kirsty. Okay. Here's an interesting part of the controversy. Is Kirsty talking politics, or is she talking policy? Is she talking local politics and the application of, or is she talking early years? Or is she talking biology?
All of them.
Okay, good, you get it. I'm sort of driving, she's talking all of them. But not everybody realizes that. Because here's why this agenda is really important to me, and we need more opportunities to think through the politics of it, both the big P politics, S&P designed this, and little p politics, like what happens for a culture when you have particular governmental policies. Here's why it matters. She says, pausing for long breath to let you anticipate what she's about to say. The childcare that we're about to provide to our children, that we're currently providing, but that we're about to expand, is going to change their biology. It's going to change who they are. And it's going to change who we are, because it's going to change our biology. And we need to engage with that. Do you feel how you all just went silent? Can you feel that? Thank you. I'm glad. Because we need to go more silent. Because we need to be scared. And we need to be curious. And we need to be hopeful. But if we leave out the fear part, then we're not cautious enough. Because if what Kirsty says is true, she's saying some scary stuff. So if we need to understand some basic biology, which is at the heart of attachment, or ACEs, or child development, whatever you want to call it. Okay, so let me give you a teeny bit of science. Brains develop more rapidly between birth and 3 than they ever will again. And in fact, really, it's between the last trimester of pregnancy and 3. They're developing more rapidly than they ever will again. And that understanding has been coming about for about the last 20 years, but it's really infiltrated Scottish early years policy in the last 10. So early years Scotland has built on that a lot. And lots of practitioners now get training on brain development. Yay. And it doesn't mean that things can't change later on if you're having tough early years, but it means that they are crucial early years. And that's why a lot of public policy has focused on them. So that means that as we unroll a childcare policy for Scotland, we need to understand that biology and that attachment system at the core of it. And I don't think that our early years policy is sufficiently attachment informed, trauma-led, or relationship-led. Because that's the second thing that we know about the science, is that brains come into the world, human brains come into the world very tuned into relationships and needing relationships for a sense of safety. So all of our public policies actually should be relationship-led, from early years to dementia to marriage guidance and relate to schools to the construction of communities, of buildings, of architecture, of rubbish, all of it. If we were really smart, we would have relationship-led rubbish collection. Please laugh. Because it sounds crazy, and we don't know what that looks like. But we would have a happy society if humanity was at the heart of every single one of our policies. But it's especially important to early years because we are shaping who children are biologically by the kinds of relationships we make possible for them through our policies. And Kirsty just said effectively that she thinks that the way the early years policy is being rolled out, it's changing the way that staff can engage with children. And it is. Because it's changing the number of children that can be in a space. Okay, they're changing. So the care inspectorate has just engaged in conversations about what counts as a space and how many children you can have in that space. What does attachment-led space look like? Let me tell you a story. I was in a nursery a fair few months ago now that was it was a council nursery. So there are 3 forms of childcare in our country. There's council-run nurseries, there's private-run nurseries, and there's childminders. And the government has money coming to local authorities to that government money comes to local authorities and then can be divvied out amongst those 3 forms of childcare. That's not done equally across local authorities. So if you take childminders, the Scottish Childminding Association did a report last year and extended it this year. Very roughly, only 1/3 of local authorities actively plan to filter that money to childminders. Another 1/3 might consider it, and the final third have no plans to make that money available to childminders because they feel they have enough places in the early years provision in their local authority. Except that Kirsty, I'm so glad you spoke. You're going to get a $5 later. Kirsty wishes that I would quit referring to her now, so she's being very brave. But she just said the word vulnerable 2-year-olds. What if having vulnerable 2-year-olds in group settings is not best for them? Several of you just went, Okay. Did the technocratic arrangement of policy know about biology or trauma so they could think about it or not? Okay, here's another interesting link. Today in Dundee, 500 staff saw the film Resilience. Yay! Were you there?
Yeah.
What was it like?
Brilliant. I saw it in June and then I saw it again before. But I took my whole staff, so we're on the journey.
Okay, so tell people who don't know what that film is, what it's about.
Oh no, I'm here to listen, that's why I came. So adverse childhood experiences and how they affect us in later life, our life chances, health, everything. Attachment. Yeah.
Beautifully said. Adverse childhood experiences, shortened to ACEs, adverse childhood experiences, ACE, is now being talked about all over Scotland. I am incredibly excited about this. I think we have a window to change things for our children and for our country. And it's being led by a film called Resilience, which if you haven't seen, keeps popping up all over. You can find a place to see it. There's lots of it on social media. The first time that film came to Scotland was in April. And I brought it along with Tina Hendry of Reattachment. We knew it was coming to the UK. It's an hour-long independent documentary. We wanted to be sure it was seen a little bit in Scotland. We showed it in Glasgow. It sold out. We did it a few more times before you knew it. Over the summer, we showed it in 25 different communities. And between April and now, it's everywhere. I can't keep track of it. 500 people saw it today in Dundee. But
it was in service days, so the council purchased a few, I think they've got 10 licences altogether, and teachers, signed up to it, and other staff who were in school.
Well, a lot of us are working hard to keep it in the public domain, so we keep scheduling screenings. Because what we want is a revolution. What I want is a revolution. I want a revolution of kindness. Because when you really start to get ACEs, and you think about it for Scotland, okay, now I'm going to say something scary. There are some people who are saying, actually, when you think about it, we raise our children harshly. We have a harsh way of raising children in Scotland. Our children are sometimes treated harshly in schools. I think it takes courage to think about that. Carol Craig is about to come out with a new book. If you follow me on social media, I've been tweeting all of this. Carol Craig is about to come out with a new book. It's launched later this year, in which she talks about that. She talks about Scotland's health problems of drinking, of violence, of drugs, of family breakdown as ACEs, as the consequence of traumatic childhoods, both now and intergenerationally. Okay, if you begin to get that, if we are brave enough to think about that, and this ACE revolution is sweeping Scotland. The film producers in America are astounded. They called them in an email to me this week. They called them wildfire screenings. So they're astounded at what is happening in Scotland. Now I know that there are still lots of people who don't know about ACEs. But how do we have it be a cultural, societal revolution? So that we think about places like Butterfly Café as about preventing trauma. You probably don't describe yourself that way usually, Dom, but that's what you're doing. We're helping to heal trauma. How do we have more spaces that do that? And how do we get brave enough to ask ourselves, could our early years policy be causing trauma, with no one intending it? Could the behavior charts that are still regularly used in schools, she pauses so that you can think about how you feel about that. We have one or two people who are laughing. Behavior charts cause shame in children. And lots of you have just gone like this. They make children aware of the ways in which they can be excluded. And we ended up with behavior charts because we stopped strapping children. Right? We used to, not all that long ago, we strapped them. 2 mothers in Scotland changed that. 2 mothers said, nah, not my kid. You're not strapping my kid. I have no idea how much courage it took them. But that climbed, and it changed 2 mothers, changed the way we relate to our children in schools. The Association of Heads of Schools defended the right of schools to strap children. They said it will be too much trouble to manage a system where you have some children whose parents have given permission to strap, and some children whose parents have not given permission to strap. We can't manage that system. It's not good for a technocratic system. Therefore, we need permission to strap all children. Good, Dom's back there. He's now rubbing his head. He's having trouble thinking about it, right? Now we would not think about strapping children. Makes us uncomfortable. But lots of you got strapped.
Thomas, over the favourite of the teachers used to be you held your hand over the desk. So when they hit your hand, your knuckles battered off the desk as well.
Oh, the real back of the knuckle.
Yeah, and you didn't go home and tell your parents because you'd get it again. Because you had trouble to get the toys in the first place.
What if that's harsh? What if that's creating ACEs? What if our school systems created ACEs for the adults in our country, and that's contributing to ill health? Was it because they were evil? Or was it because they were just doing what was normal? Is it because we saw it as behavior and we didn't understand the biology underneath it? If we get attachment and we truly get the biology of child development, of human development, we start to think differently about everything. But it takes courage, because we wonder, did we hurt our own children with what we didn't know when they were babies? Or we feel guilty as a teacher because we've used behavior charts our whole career, and Suzanne, you never really said yet about the behavior charts, and I don't know what you mean. But you said shame, and that sounds bad. So how do we talk about this stuff? And how do we do it in a way that can change rapidly so that we're not going another generation? ACEs, the science has known about them for 20 years, but it didn't make it into our public policies. But if we think that that is only going to be about some policies for the poverty, for the families in, at the edges of the Kingsway, the socially deprived communities, Kirkton and Fintry, and it's not about us, we're going to get it wrong. That's where we're going to go wrong, if we think it's about them and not about us. So you are really brave in being here tonight to be willing to think about human development, and particularly about what our early years policies need, because I think it's about the whole of our culture. But our early years policies, if we don't get them right, we're going to change our children's biology. We're going to change the way they do emotions, the way they cope with stresses. And that's going to happen really fast. Here are some specific things that policy doesn't yet think about. It doesn't think enough about the ratios between how many staff to how many children do you need. It doesn't think about the drop-off policies, because when you drop off children, that's a separation, and that is the core thing at the heart of human anxiety, is separation from loved ones, especially for children. We don't have clear drop-off and pick-up policies. Now, when we do a lot of picking up, lots of parents have mobile phones. So it breaks the reconnection that children need. Debbie's here from Burnside Primary, and she doesn't want me to say that, but Debbie, will you wave anyway, please? Okay, Debbie's just barely put her hands up there, and I'm noting that because Burnside Primary is just up in Carnoustie. They are integrating this stuff into the whole of the way that they operate. They are now one of the...
Nikki just got elected today to ask parents not to use mobile phones in the playground.
Okay, say that. Nikki just asked...
Got elected today. Worded it very well, and since asked that mobile phones be kept in pockets when they're in the playground, so that we can focus more on teaching their children as they come back to school.
When did he do that, Debbie?
Today.
Okay, can I repeat that?
Yeah.
Okay? There's a school 10 miles up the road who has decided that relationship-led practice is so important to them. They found a way to say to their parents, in a way that doesn't scare them, that if they can keep their mobile phones in their pockets and greet their children, they might. I don't know what he said in the letter. It only went out today. I didn't know that until Debbie just said that. But he's not brave enough to think about that. Do all our schools need that? And if they do, how do you say it in a way so people don't feel told off, the parents or the schools?
We have a way. We say, greet your child with a smile.
Okay, so here's a suggestion. Greet your child with a smile, not a mobile. That's good. It almost rhymes. It's poetry. But what parents will feel when they hear that, they'll sort of get that makes sense, and then they'll feel guilty. Then they'll feel bad, and they'll have to cope with a sense of guilt. And some people cope with a sense of guilt by getting mad at the school and saying, you can't tell me what to do. And others go home and feel really guilty and go back to bed and pull the covers over their heads. How do we talk about this stuff in a way that keeps us curious and not told off? That's the trick. Because this stuff is so fundamental to who we are and how we relate to our children and our feelings about ourselves as teachers and earlier staff and parents. We need to think carefully about, it's not just information. It transforms who we think we are and what we think relationships are. And then we start to realize that it applies to drop-off policies, to ratios, to the room transitions. So when you move from the baby room to the toddler room to the 3 to 5 room to primary school, if you practice attachment-led care, which Early Years Scotland it says is a great idea, and I think it's a great idea, if you came to love that staff member and you move to another room in a day and you never see them again, you think they died. If we don't do room transitions carefully, we create bereavements for our children. Dr. Zeedyk, you shouldn't have put it that way. That makes me really uncomfortable. I know, that's why I did it. Because I'm trying to find words. I'm trying to find words that help us to think more carefully about what our early years policy looks like without tipping us over into anxiety. So if any of you have room transitions that you're now wondering about in this moment, start by forgiving yourself. Because a lot of us haven't thought about this. And we need to. Because let me end with that story I promised you a minute ago, and then Simon, I'm going to shut up and you can talk to us about human-based policies. Okay? So here's what we don't see. I was in a nursery a fair few months ago, council-run nursery. They were doing their best with the building they had, but it wasn't a great building. And it was packed with children who were running around and screaming and doing the things that 2-year-olds are meant to do. But it was so loud, it was really loud. And so I started to talk to a little girl. I got down on my knees. I did all that best practice. And she was trying to say something to me, but she had a little bit of a speech impediment. And I couldn't hear what she said, mostly because it was too loud. And she kept saying something to me, and it took me too late did I realize she was trying to say she wanted to have my scarf, because I had a brightly colored scarf. And by the time I took it off, she was fed up with me and she marched off. Quite right too, stupid adult. I couldn't figure out how to repair it. So I had hurt her feelings. But the trouble was I couldn't hear her. A few minutes later, I heard later, she hit another child. She was given a timeout by the staff who practiced a behavior policy. Nobody but me would have known that what had happened is she was mad at me, and she took it out on another child. And we made it worse for her because we punished her, because nobody got curious about what the hitting might do. And her local authority has no idea that their setting is damaging children. Now, maybe damage is too strong. It's just one interaction. I told the staff what I thought had happened. They could rethink it. But what happens if that's every day because the children can't hear each other and the staff can't hear them? What happens if we're doing so much recording of evidence that it interferes with the relationships that staff have to... Good, okay, so here's a bit of leadership as I really do wind down. Find a piece of paperwork and just say, nope. That will take courage. Okay, you can blame me. Tweet it tonight. Dr. Zeedyk says, but it's bloody true. Okay, the evidence that we gather for ourselves, when it interferes with what children need, damages children. And we need to have the courage to think that and say it and talk to each other about it. And so all I'm really trying to do is stem courage and curiosity that make us brave and bring about a revolution of kindness. And I am really hopeful, because if Jerry gives me this book back, can I tell you how I ended my chapter in this wonderful book? Here's my last 2 sentences. Three sentences. If we have the courage to look closely at who we are now, then we have a better chance of becoming the kind of country we aspire to be. Scotland can be a beacon to the world in its early years policy. All it takes is the courage and the will. But technocrats aren't going to help us have courage and will. The courage and the will come from us and places like this and people who have the courage to try to say no. And that's all you, because you wanted to come and talk about the politics of early years. Thank you for being here.